Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a good game, and I do mean that. It's not great, but it's not bad. It's just good. It's the sequel to 2015's Ori and the Blind Forest, and is pretty similar. It does one thing very, very well, and that's platforming. The combat is also pretty good, and similar to Hollow Knight's combat. So if you came into this video wondering if you should buy Ori and play it, the answer is probably. Especially if you enjoy platformers or Metroidvanias. Maybe wait until it goes on sale, because $30 is perhaps a bit much for a game of this length, but all the same, it's a good game. So if it sounds like fun, play it and then come back and watch this video. That said, the game has a lot of wasted potential and the story isn't super great. It has a lot of issues. It does a lot of good things though, and some pretty incredible things. I'll go over the good and the bad in much detail in this critique. I know this video is a little long, so I've segmented it into parts. Those timestamps will be in the description. This video does contain spoilers. Ori and the Will of the Wisps gameplay is very good. Of course, it has problems, and they are numerous and substantial, but the gameplay is still pretty great. The game has three main facets of gameplay, as I see it: platforming, combat, and exploration. I'll start with the platforming because it is arguably the focus of Will of the Wisps, although it takes a much smaller focus than it did in the first game. This game has some of the most fun platforming mechanics I've ever experienced in a game. The movement feels very good to control, and it's incredibly fluid, allowing you to juggle yourself in the air for a terrifically long amount of time. It is possible to make your way across 3 areas of the map without touching the ground, which is an incredible feat by the developers. But the platforming has problems and a lot of wasted potential. Let's talk about the abilities. You start with a wall jump, which is just a standard wall jump, really. You can jump from the wall which you are currently attached to a wall opposite it, or back to the same wall. It gets the job done and is a necessary part of Ori's moveset. The first movement ability you get is the double jump, early into the game. It's not a very high jump, more allowing you to stay in the air for longer rather than jump much farther up into the air than you already are. The jump doesn't actually allow you to change your direction midair, which is different from, say, Hollow Knight. This adds to the feeling of fluidity I spoke about earlier. I like it. It's pretty basic as far as abilities go, but it is needed. The second platforming ability is dash. It is exactly that, a dash forward. This comes almost right after the double jump, and it opens up the movement substantially. This is where the platforming started to open up for me, and where I really started enjoying it. Dash has been improved from the first game, allowing you to dash in midair from the get-go. I really like this ability. It is, again, a necessary addition to Ori's moveset to make the platforming feel as fun and fluid as it does. The third platforming ability you obtain is Bash. This is one of my favorite abilities in the game, and I am certainly not alone in that. When you get close to an enemy, projectile, or lantern, you can hold down a button to slow time and point an arrow in the direction you want to launch Ori. Then you let go of the button and Ori will be launched in that direction. The projectile or enemy that Ori is bouncing off of is shot in the opposite direction. This ability is a stroke of genius from the designers because it turns enemies and projectiles into platforming tools. It's also just very fun to use and an integral part of what makes Ori Ori. This was the best ability in the first game and is still probably the best one here. There is another ability that may top it, but we will talk about that later. All of the abilities mentioned so far were old abilities from the first game, and given to you in the second hour or so of this game. Now I'm going to get into the new abilities, unique to Will of the Wisp. These are the ones I am generally less keen on. The fourth movement ability you get is Grapple. This ability is essentially a grappling hook that tethers you onto either a flower or blue moss to which Ori will stick. It'll then pull you onto that object. I like this ability in concept because I think grappling hooks are always a really fun mechanic, and this one is kind of fun, but it has some very prevalent flaws. The first one is that it is less of a grappling hook and more of a device that almost instantly brings Ori to the intended location. I think it would have been much more fun and interesting if this grappling hook made Ori do a swing, like in Metroid or Spider-Man or something, rather than just pull you right to a location. This would have added to the fluidity of the movement as well, allowing you to chain it with other moves instead of just stopping you in your tracks when you reach the destination of the grapple. As it is now, that kind of kills your momentum. The second problem is that it is a contextual ability. It's only really used in the section it's introduced in, the Wellspring, and can only be used on the blue moss or the flower that I spoke about earlier. I take issue with this because it doesn't really contribute to the overall platforming and movement of the game. It would be so much better and so much more fun if you could use this ability any time in traversal, attaching to the ceiling above you or some such, rather than just attaching to where the game tells you can. I think the reason for not allowing this is that it would be a bit overpowered and would allow for sequence breaking and such in the game. Also, it would be hard to know where the grapple would land when the player presses the button if the grapple could attach to anything without having an annoying indicator always on screen. Incidentally, my solution for the first problem also fixes the second problem. If it was made into more of a swinging grappling hook, it would not be as overpowered and you couldn't latch onto high up places and skip sections of the game. It would have to be assigned to a different button though, because currently it is the same button as bash. It would also be much easier to know where the grapple would land, above and ahead of the player's small amount. I think this would be a much more fun, fluid, and interesting rendition of the ability, allowing for a wider use in more difficult platforming and use in situations where it's not necessarily needed, which would be a stellar contribution to Ori's moveset. Alas, its potential has been wasted. Fifth comes Kurua's Feather. Yet again returning from Ori and the Blind Forest, this ability lets you glide in midair and ride air currents for extended airtime. I don't really have much to say about this ability. It's a needed addition and allows for more fluid platforming. The only negative I've found about it is that I sometimes forget I have the ability and have to remind myself about it, which may be an issue with me and not the game. That's all. The next ability is less of a platforming ability and more of an ability used for puzzles, but I'm going to cover it here because it can be used for platforming. It is the Light Burst, which is a flame that Ori throws at any angle from a standstill, which can be used to complete some puzzles in Bowser's Reach. Ori can bash off of it. I like this ability, but it has flaws. One of these is that it stops Ori in their tracks when they use it. This is somewhat necessary for the uses in puzzles that the ability already has, but it stops any momentum that the player may have had and kills any sense of speed or fluidity. This ability also can't be used in any of Ori's famous platforming gauntlets, which I'll talk about soon, because it is too slow to be used in precision, fast-paced platforming. I think it's interesting to let Ori throw something that they can bash off of, however, and the ability has a lot of potential, some of which is explored in the Bowser's Reach puzzle platforming. It would have much more potential, though, if it was tweaked a little bit. If it bounced off walls a couple times before fizzling out, I think it would have many more interesting and complex uses in both puzzles and platforming. For example, you could throw it at a wall, it would bounce back, and you could bash it, and then do it again, and that would be more interesting, I think, than the current rendition. Where it would reach its full potential as a movement ability, though, is if you were able to throw it very quickly without stopping in your tracks at a consistent angle on both the ground and in midair. Perhaps this could be a separate action than the ordinary Light Burst, where you can throw it at any angle. A button press rather than holding it down, maybe? This change would stop the issue of the ability killing your momentum, as it would be something you could throw out while running or in the air, and it would be at a consistent angle, allowing for a bash off of it after a throw. This would add to the already amazing momentum and fluidity of the game's movement, and I believe it would make it even better. But this ability is partially wasted because of its slow speed. The next movement abilities are Burrow and Swim Dash. I'm grouping these abilities together because they are the exact same ability, but Burrow lets you, burrow through the sand and dash into and out of it. The Swim Dash does the exact same thing, but in water. This ability is fine, it's fun to use, it feels good to use, but it comes back to that issue of being contextual. You can only use it near water or sand. This is much the same problem that the grapple has. It leaves no room for mastery over the ability when it is only able to be used in certain situations. No room for creativity or player expression. The best way I can think to illustrate this is to compare it with Bash. With Bash, you can use it practically anywhere and in a variety of ways. There is plenty of room for mastery, and you can constantly improve at using it in more creative, stylistic, and efficient ways. This allows for a difficulty curve, as expertly shown in the Jinzo Tree in Ori and the Blind Forest, the first Ori game. This is the dungeon where you gain the Bash ability, and it brilliantly sets up the ability, introduces it, makes you master it, and then puts you through a test of skill at the end. It is the highlight moment of the Blind Forest, and there's really nothing like it here. That's disappointing, but not baffling considering this Burrow ability. There's really nothing to do with this ability other than dash in sand and water. There's no way to use this ability creatively, and there is no way to truly master it, or even get better at using it. You just get used to the ability and move on. Is there a way to fix this ability? I really can't see a solution. It seems like it shouldn't be the subject of 2 whole areas and 2 whole platforming sequences or bosses, which we'll talk about later, and it seems like it should just be a minor ability. The last movement ability Ori receives is Launch. This is the best new ability in Ori and the Will-o'-the-Wisps. It feels the best to control, it's the most useful, it has the most room for mastery, and it fits well with the rest of Ori's moveset. This move is essentially Bash, but without the need for a projectile to bounce off of. It lets you instantly change direction and shoot off in that direction. It is the best new addition to Ori's moveset, but that comes with one large caveat. Launch is given to Ori so late in the game that it's barely used outside of one dungeon and a boss fight. This, to me, seems like it should have been the Bash of Will-o'-the-Wisps. It should have been introduced much earlier and used to a much greater extent throughout the game. There is so much more that could have been done with this ability, and it could have made the rest of the game's platforming so much better if it had been introduced in the middle of the game. Yet again, wasted potential. There is one more major part of the platforming, and that's the difficult platforming gauntlets that act as tests of your skills, generally testing a specific ability similar to bosses. The first game leaned into this really hard, and these platforming gauntlets were very difficult and fun. In Will of the Wisps, though, most of them are too easy or unsatisfying, or more frequently, both. I completed most of them in a try or two at most, because they were gimmicky and easy. This, as well as the fact that they revolve around contextual abilities, make them unsatisfying. The platforming sections focused on grapple and burrow were just easy and kind of bad because those abilities do not require or even leave room for mastery. You literally just press a button when it prompts you to. The burrow gauntlet is better, but that's mainly because of the stuff that isn't burrow. But nothing is as good as the Jinzo Tree gauntlet in the first game, and that makes me sad. Overall, I'd say the platforming in this game is very good, and it improves upon the first game's platforming slightly. However, it has so much potential that goes unused, and that pains me. It may sound harsh to say that most of the new abilities are weak, but I say that because I love this game. It's just frustrating because the game could be so much better. Even by just implementing the changes I talked about above and then changing the world design to accommodate these changes, the game would be exponentially improved. Combat is the second facet of gameplay in Ori and the Will of the Wisps. It is a very substantial improvement from the first game. It's now much more involved and skill-based, and it allows for a wide range of playstyles. I like it a lot. It, like the platforming, does have issues, though. It seems to be copying a lot of the things that Hollow Knight does, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself. It is in fact a good thing. Hollow Knight's combat is amazing. However, I think the Ori designers took a lot of the things from Hollow Knight and changed them without quite knowing why they worked so well in Hollow Knight. I'll now go over the combat abilities and explain what I mean. The first combat ability Ori gets is the Spirit Edge. It's just a sword, that's all. I like it well enough. It has a couple of combos if you match X enough, one in the air, one on the ground. It has downwards and upwards slashes. The downward strike is more of a thrust, and it is almost useless. This is the first example of taking something and changing it for no discernible reason. A downward thrust mechanic isn't in Hollow Knight, it's more of a slash in that game. Shovel Knight, though, has this kind of downward thrust with a notable difference. Shovel Knight bounces after hitting something with his downward thrust. The Knight in Hollow Knight does the exact same thing. This is very important because in Will of the Wisps, Ori doesn't do this. That's an issue because the bounce is integral to this move. It lets the player use it while not falling into the enemy and taking damage. It seems to me that this wasn't considered while making the sword in Ori. I barely used a downward thrust because it didn't have a bounce, and therefore was too risky to use. The sword will almost always be mapped to the X button on the controller. See, Ori has an ability wheel where you can quickly map some abilities to the X, Y, and B buttons on an Xbox controller. You won't change the sword from the X button because you're constantly using it. The second combat ability Ori gains is Regenerate. This is the healing ability, much like Hollow Knight's focus ability. You hold the assign button to heal 3 of Ori's life cells in exchange for some energy cells. It's fine, it does its job, but again I think the devs missed the point on this one. In Hollow Knight you gain soul, the resource you need to heal, by hitting enemies. It forced you to be aggressive so you could heal, which makes for an interesting and fun ebb and flow of combat. In Ori, the healing system is linked to the energy, which can only be gained by hitting these crystals. This forces an uninteresting and an unenjoyable playstyle. Camp near the crystal, hit the enemy when it comes near, hit the crystal, heal, and repeat. Also, when you get hit while healing, you can just keep healing without an interruption of the animation. This doesn't force commitment to healing, it just lets the player heal any time, rather than finding times to heal strategically. The boring playstyle is an issue in boss encounters and combat gauntlets, at least on hard mode. Out in the world, combat is so easy that this is a non-issue, but that brings up another issue. Combat outside of bosses in specified combat rooms is very easy. I don't think I died once to an enemy in the larger world. It wasn't a challenge, it was simply a distraction. Even the higher level enemies like the corrupted Gorlek were not that hard to kill. All I had to do was simply break its shield with one hit of my hammer, and then hit it a couple times while easily dodging attacks. And this was in hard mode. The next combat ability is Spirit Arc. It's just a bow. I like it though. It allows for a variety in combat and player choice and expression. I'm not sure it should be using energy, as that stopped me from using it that often because I was using energy for healing and other things, afraid of wasting it. Then there's Blaze. It sets enemies on fire. I almost never used this. It just wasn't effective enough for the amount of energy it used. Perhaps there could have been some enemies that it worked better on than others, or it could have not used energy and just been on a cooldown to encourage experimentation. Spirit Smash is next. I used this one quite a bit, probably because 1, it didn't use energy, and 2, it was just plain fun to use. It's a big hammer that hits hard but is very slow. When upgraded, it has a downward smash attack which sends spikes radiating out from Ori. Spirit Star. It's a boomerang. Next up, Spike. It's a big spear that Ori throws at enemies. It does an obscene amount of damage, and I found myself using it entirely too often. I think it should have done less damage, but still cost a good bit of energy. I found myself using this, the sword, and the hammer far too much, and the rest of the combat abilities hardly ever. This is largely a balancing issue, I think, but maybe it was just me not trying hard enough to use the rest of the abilities. I like the variety of weapons here. It allows for a lot of player expression and experimentation in combat, and with some tweaking, could be pretty balanced. The combat mechanics and systems are pretty good. Not as good as Hollow Knight, which is what it seems to be imitating, but they're okay nonetheless. The enemy design is also okay, and can get pretty interesting when you face a flying enemy and a grounded enemy at the same time, or with various other enemy combinations. Another thing borrowed from Hollow Knight is the charm system. Sorry, they're called spirit shards here, but they're just charms from Hollow Knight, which are usually just small little abilities and buffs you can switch around at save points. My issue with Ori's charms is twofold. One, most of the charms are uninteresting. They don't really change gameplay or allow for different playstyle like Hollow Knight's do. They're mostly just like a certain % damage boost against certain types of enemies and such. They're pretty boring with the exception of Ultra Grapple, but that's just one charm that should have been a part of the base move. I think they're all boring because they all have to be balanced with each other, so none of them can be super overpowered and therefore change up gameplay a lot. Hollow Knight's solution to this is so elegant it baffles me that it wasn't used here. Each charm in Hollow Knight has a certain number of charm slots attached to it, so the more overpowered ones can just cost more slots. Also, it's silly that you can change out charms anytime in Ori, which takes away some of the possibilities for strategy. This is another area where they don't quite seem to know why the systems were the way they were in Hollow Knight. The bosses are a mixed bag here. They feel like they should have been the highlight of the game. They're always a big spectacle and always look incredible. However, some of them don't feel incredible in gameplay. Also, issues with the save system force you to feel like you have to try again and again to kill a boss and just grind it all out in one go. This discourages exploration. Howl is the first boss and he confuses me. He's a wolf, and he has 2 attacks that he just repeats, over and over. The clear way to defeat him is to just sit in a corner and hit him when he comes near, as you can see by my god tier gameplay here. It's not a good boss because of this campy, boring playstyle, and he just runs away after you get him down to half health. I kept expecting him to come back for a rematch because I didn't actually kill him. That seemed to be set up by his flight from the area. But no, he never came back. Perhaps it was cut content? Anyway, Hornburg's next up. He's a big beetle that you must attack from behind. But all he is a larger version of an already existing enemy. He just runs at you. It's not a great boss. Mora is the big spider boss and my least favorite, even though she is more complex than the previously mentioned bosses. She has some pretty good and well-telegraphed attacks, but there is one that instantly kills you that is so poorly telegraphed I missed it even when I was watching out for it. An attack setup should not be this short when it kills you instantly. Also, her hitbox is sometimes unclear. It's just her head, which is kind of weird. There's then a platforming section in the middle, which I enjoyed, and a second phase. The second phase is okay, has constant pressure from spiderlings, but it has one major issue. The flash ability is needed here, but the telegraph for when you need it is again so poor that I died multiple times when I was watching for it. She darkens the room, and you need to instantly recognize that you need flash, or you die. That sucks. There shouldn't be an attack that instantly kills the player, regardless of if it's well telegraphed or not. That just feels unfair. The boss also kind of feels like a damage sponge, barely taking any damage per hit. That just could be hard mode. If it is, that's still a bad thing. Qualock is the next boss, and he's disappointing. I don't mean the gameplay part, that part is okay, it's fine. The water section near the end isn't great, but overall an alright boss. The part that disappoints me, though, is the story relating to him. Qualock is set up as your friend, a big giant frog that helps you on your quest, which we'll talk about later. Anyways, you go up to him at the end of the water area, and he starts to attack you. I thought this was going to be a plot twist, and a cool one at that. I thought possibly there could have been something sinister going on the whole game, and Qualock was going to betray Ori, forcing Ori to strike out on his own, into a more hostile world, constantly being pursued by Qualock and his Moki. But no, Qualock is just being mind-controlled by a stink spirit. Yes, that's actually what it's called, so there can be an underwhelming boss fight. That's really disappointing. Side note, Qualock and Mora both seem to have almost completely random attack patterns. Randomness in order of attacks is good, but not to that extent. There should be some contextual attacks from these bosses. Shriek is the final boss of this game, and she is outstanding. Disregarding all of the story-related qualms I have about Shriek, her boss fight is kick-ass. It's really, really good. It has quick telegraphs that require fast reactions but are still readable, it has good attacks, fun mechanics, and the last phase of it is simply incredible. The floor falls out from under Ori, and then he has to bash off the falling poison bolts and use launch to move around. while continuing to fight Shriek, all in midair without touching the ground. This is awesome! Do you know why you only use bash, launch, and dash in this section? Because they're not contextual abilities. Wow, what a surprise. If the other abilities weren't contextual, they would also be able to be used here. And if my changes were followed, the light orb would be used here too, and this section would be better. Regardless of this, it's still an incredible section, and an awesome combination of combat and platforming to finish this game off. Exploration is the last gameplay pillar in Ori and the Will of the Wisps. As a Metroidvania, this game should encourage exploration and have multiple ways through the game. Exploration is one of my favorite activities in video games. And I hate to be so negative here, but this game did not encourage exploration. The constant use of the stupid, abysmal quest markers absolutely discouraged it. This is a good time to talk about the quest markers. Quest markers are so idiotic. They are a brain-dead way to direct the player in a direction, at least in the way Ori does it. Sometimes it can be done well, like in Breath of the Wild, where the quest markers are generally in places in the middle of unmarked territory on the map, or Hollow Knight, which has a total of 3 quest markers in unknown locations. But Ori's map, at the end of this game, it looks like a damn Ubisoft map. Quest markers for every little side quest, for the main quest too. This doesn't encourage exploration, it actively discourages it, which is undoubtedly a drawback. Not having a quest marker, or having one that is very, very far away, encourages exploration of different paths, forcing players to make their own way through the world. I went through this game without exploring on my own one bit. I just went from quest marker to quest marker, and went through what felt like a linear path. I never explored just for the sake of exploring, which is so disappointing because Ori's moveset would be so much fun to explore with. But even without the quest markers, the world design seemed to discourage exploration. Most of the areas had 1 or sometimes 2 entrances. This is an issue because it forces a linear path through the game. A playthrough of this game doesn't feel like an adventure because you're largely on a scripted path through it. It didn't help that the areas don't have a lot of creativity either. It's pretty generic underground, snow, sand, and water areas. It's impossible to stumble upon a new area because there's an objective in every area of the game and you only go to that area once the game gives you that objective. Let me compare this to the first Ori game, which does exploration better. In Ori and the Blind Forest, you are given 3 quest markers in total. These quest markers are far away and take a good while to get to. There are also many places near the starting area that are inaccessible with your starting moveset, so those stick in your brain and incentivize you to go explore, find abilities that let you get past them, and return. This is an integral part of the Metroidvania formula. Ori 2 does not do this, or it doesn't do it nearly as well. The first part of this game is a linear path from objective to objective. There were no hooks that piqued my interest, nothing I couldn't get past to come back to later. This is partly the fault of the quest markers being so frequent, pushing you to go here, do this, then there, but also largely the fault of the world design. It tries to get you to explore by hiding the game's currency in every nook and cranny, but that's not good enough incentive to explore. I don't even know if it's fair to call this game a Metroidvania. It doesn't use world design to guide the player where to go, it uses quest markers. It's largely a linear experience, except for a part in the middle where there are 3 different linear paths that you can do in any order. I also want to talk about the fast travel and saving here because it is linked to exploration. Once again, the first story did both of these things better. In the first game, you could only fast travel from the large save points. You would have to move to a save point, often a moderate distance away, to be able to fast travel. This forced you to get better at movement and become more familiar with the world. You would also save manually, taking up mana for a risk-reward system where you could push your luck and wait to save, but if you died, you would have to go all the way back to when you saved. In Ori and the Will of the Wisps, it autosaves constantly, taking away a fun and unique mechanic and replacing it with a boring and trite one. Also, in Will of the Wisps, you are allowed to fast travel from any point on the map if you purchase the really cheap upgrade for it. This discourages exploration yet again and doesn't let you learn the layout of the world. I don't understand these changes. They are very obvious downgrades from the first system and make the game less unique. The mapping system is another thing stolen from Hollow Knight and changed for no good reason. See, in Hollow Knight you are going through an area completely blind without knowing where you are going. No map, nothing. You have to find this cartographer, Cornifer, and he sells you a very bare-bones map of an area. Then you have to go fill it out. Ori once again steals the system, but with a character called Lupo waiting for you at some point in an area to sell you a map. See, the problem with this is that there is no need for Lupo because Ori already auto-maps. Why is he there then? It's very confusing to me. Dungeons, which is what I'll call the areas with puzzles focused around one ability, also fall under exploration. I'll briefly go over each one. The first dungeon, the Wellspring, is very confusing, and has you constantly going in and out of these rooms in many dungeons that are behind the rest of the world, which makes it confusing as to where you're going and what you're supposed to do. The layout of constantly switching in between the many dungeons in the world is also needlessly complicated. The puzzles here are fine. The Snow Dungeon is great. The puzzles are pretty interesting and enjoyable. The Spider Dungeon is just okay. Its puzzles are mainly just timed platforming, which I enjoyed. The Sand Dungeon is extremely lacking because it's just pointless exposition that could have been done via environmental storytelling rather than lore dumps. The final dungeon is good because it revolves around launch. Its challenges and puzzles are enjoyable, if a bit tedious at times, and the mini-boss there isn't great. Regardless, it is fun to move through this world thanks to Ori's really good movement mechanics, so it has that going for it. If the world were better designed with many interlocking paths between areas, and if the world was larger with more optional areas and better hooks that stick in your brain so that you could come back to them later, this game's exploration would be among the best. But as it stands now, that's not the case. Ori's story is all about emotions. It's not a complex, intricate narrative with branching paths, fascinating world building, or deep characters. Far from it. It's a simple story about two owls in a tree, which is what makes it work for some people. It's simple and lets the animation and music do most of the story, which I think can be an excellent storytelling method. But I just don't like it here. The story is uninspired, unexplained, and boring at times. I tried to become immersed in it, to invest myself in the story, but I kept having these unanswered questions. See, the story unfolds like this. There's this cute owl, Ku, who gets blown off into a distant land when it tries to fly with Ori. This cute owl is separated from Ori, and Ori has to find it. Ori grabs a torch and is attacked by a large wolf, Howl. I assume this is because the wolf is protecting its territory, but the game doesn't actually tell you anything about why the fight is happening. The fight does seem to be setting up another fight, a rematch with the wolf later in the game, because you get it down to half its health and it runs away. But it's not. As I said before, a rematch was probably cut content. Anyway, Ori is then approached by these cat-like creatures called the Moki, and they tell him that they saw Ku, the baby owl, walking off somewhere. The Moki will keep telling Ori where Ku is throughout the story, but they never actually bring Ku back, even though the Moki seem to see him a lot. I think, rather than have the Moki constantly tell Ori where Ku is so Ori could get to him, it would be better to have the player see Ku on an inaccessible part of their screen, wandering away from Ori accidentally. This would solve a couple issues. It would alleviate the boredom that comes with the Moki constantly talking to you, it would make the player more invested in finding the owl, and it would help the game rely less on waypoints. Constant little teases of Ku, such as having him fly or run off screen every so often, would keep the player's goal fresh in their mind and would drive them to complete their goal, helping them pacing and flow. It's worked in plenty of other games, and would work wonders here for the Find Ku questline that permeates the first half of this game. Speaking of waypoints, this would be a good time to touch on the side content in this game. The side content seems like an afterthought. It seems shoved into the game, rushed and uninspired. The only type of side content is fetch quests. Find X to get Y. It's uninteresting and not challenging. Quests in this game sometimes even give you the goal for the quest before you get the prompt for the quest. That's ridiculous. The characters who give you the side quests are also uninspired, lazy, and forgettable characters. The quests can't even be cataloged. There is no quest log, which means you have to keep all these forgettable quests in your head the entire time you play. The side content is silly and should not have been in the game at all. Back to the story. Ori, before being able to get Ku, needs to clear the waters in the world, which means going to the windmill and getting it to work again. This is another issue with the story in my eyes, because it's the exact same beat used in the first game. It's not creative, and therefore isn't good quest writing. But once the waters are cleansed, Ori can proceed to the next area and finally find Ku. Shriek, the game's main villain and the final boss, appears here fully for the first time. Shriek is the major issue with this game's story. The motives for any of her actions are not made clear, and the ones that could be interpreted are weak at best. She's hunting Ku and Ori for a reason explained by the narrator of this story, who is completely unnecessary, by the way. The reason is that she wants her forest to be completely silent. We aren't told why she wants her forest to be silent. The motive for hunting Ori is further devalued by the fact that the owl herself is actually very loud. She, as her name implies, constantly shrieks and yells, which goes against her whole gimmick. This I am willing to look past, because after all, the story is not the main focus of this game. What I cannot overlook is how Shriek is made the main villain of this game for a different, yet still weak reason. She is, apparently, haunted by her past and attacks anyone that reminds her of her past. I had to go on the wiki to figure that out, by the way. The game doesn't tell you that, it just gives you a flashback of her past, and you're supposed to figure out that that's the reason she attacks Ori from there. This is a silly reason, it's lazy, and still doesn't explain why Shriek continues to attack Ori after Ku dies, because Ku would be the only one that reminded her of her past. But regardless, the story goes on. Ori is then sent to a very video gamey quest to find 4 light orbs, which is where the game opens up a little bit, which I enjoy. It's good to give the player choice, especially in regards to exploration. It's not a very good story choice, though, because it takes you out of what little immersion you may have been in due to the gamey nature of the quest. After you go on these little fetch quests, you're sent to the desert to find one final light orb, when they combine into a different colored light orb, and then you go to revive the spirit tree. Of course, this goes wrong, and Shriek steals the light orb. I'm honestly not sure why, and I couldn't find a feasible explanation for this. Then, Ori fights Shriek, and everything is back to normal and the story wraps up in a nice way. I had so many unanswered questions and criticisms of this story. I didn't like it at all, and I thought it was weak, uninspired, and lazy. But I think it did its job. The visuals and audio really sell it and make you feel emotions when you're supposed to. I do mean that. Without the music, this story would not work in the slightest. As it is, it serves its purpose. Besides, the story is by no means the main focus of this game, nor should be. Ori and the Will of the Wisps is a very divided game. In some respects, it's amazing. Incredible. I cannot even begin to think of how much work went into this game to make it look, sound, and feel as good as it did. But then in other respects, it's terrible, or uninspired, or feels lazy. Ultimately, this game comes out to an incredibly flawed, but fun, fluid, and breathtaking experience that should be played by anyone who loves platformers.